All right. What's going on, everybody? You are back live with the Roundtable podcast show. It is Wednesday, as we always do at this time. So, get a chance, please share this particular show. It is streaming live on Facebook as well as YouTube. And I will again be remiss not to introduce my partners in crime. I have Miss Melissa Pitbull Bartlett that is joining us. He keeps everybody on their toes as well as in line because she is the pitbull in the dress. And we have the man, the myth, the legend, Adrian A Money. What's going on, sir? And why do we call him A Money? I keep forgetting. Why is that?
We call him A Money because when he brings us a guest, facts, or any type of information, you can bank on it.
Bank on it. Yes, indeed.
Wow. I appreciate it, family. And the man in my upper left-hand corner, Mr. Urban himself, Kerry Disby.
Hello, everybody. Hope y'all are doing well. We are fortunate to be here on this day. I love to tell people that because, again, it's so many things that are going on in our communities, in our lifestyles right now. COVID is still running abound, and just to be able to sit with my partners in crime, my brother and my sister, and to have these guests on here is truly a blessing. So, with that being said, A Money, you get the honors because you brought this gentleman to the table.
Yes, this is a true blessing. Today we have Jamie Gaskin, Chief Executive Officer of the United Way of Genesee, which is located pretty much near Flint, Michigan. So thank you for joining us today, sir.
Well, I'm more than happy to be here to share some of our story.
All right.
So here we are. It looks like people are starting to come in. So you guys go ahead as I start fielding, of course, the calls and everything that is coming through.
Okay.
A Money, you want to get started with your guest?
Go ahead, Melissa. All right.
I was just saying you want to go ahead and go first and get started with your guest, as this is truly a gift to us.
Sure. Right, Mr. Gaskin, with the lack of media coverage of late and your organization pretty much on the front lines of the Flint water crisis, can you give us a brief update possibly on what the morale is currently in the community that you're serving?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think like every community in the country, we're struggling, with COVID on top of the water. And we're struggling with similar issues of equity and disparity because we're a largely African-American city in terms of the city of Flint itself. So when you peel back the pandemic piece, you still have this long-term, challenge around safe, clean drinking water in our city. And quite frankly, the issue of trust between the public and the quality of the water that's available to them. And right, this is really similar to this idea that, do I trust a vaccine, right? From folks that have maybe not told me the truth in the past. And we very much are still struggling with a crisis of trust related to the quality of the water. I'm confident in saying to you, all the service line pipes that were going to be replaced, there's only about 500 left that have to be replaced. So thousands of service lines have been replaced. We probably have the most regulated water system in the United States because of the crisis. And the water quality is much improved. But that really doesn't give confidence to the folks that have really been stung by the water crisis. So again, when quite frankly, you feel like the water coming out of the tap in Flint is significantly better and safer than a lot of places, we have a complete crisis in confidence as that relates to that. I'll also, I guess, share that at the same time, the criminal cases regarding the kind of the taking responsibility for the water crisis, those are just now back in the courtroom. So we've got, I think, about 9 people charged criminally for misdemeanor to manslaughter. So folks are watching that play out sort of on TV. then we have the financial settlement with several of the entities involved, which has landed on about $650 million available. And that's in a process where folks have to make their claims into that process. And so there's a lot going on in Flint, right? There's challenge with the trust. There's this issue of the courts and accountability for people that were involved and responsible for some of the things associated with the water crisis. And then there's this legal settlement, all of which kind of have their unique complications to deal with. So I guess I really feel like the folks in Flint, if I'm trying to speak for folks, is always not an easy thing to do. But I'd say that, between all the things, you're still pretty overwhelmed and still very challenged by the situation that started more than 5 years ago.
And it's been 5 years. Can you imagine? I mean, we're pulling our hair out about, who thought that we would still be in a pandemic or having restrictions on your social life for a year. Can you imagine these citizens of Flint, Michigan? This has been 5 years, and we have, thankfully and gracefully, people like Mr. Gaskin in his office who are on the ground, and they've been picking up that torch to try to bring comfort and just a normal way of life to them for this time period.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I certainly appreciate your kind words. I would tell you, we're just a part of a broader network of local organizations trying to do the work. These are, the partners that we have in doing this work, quite frankly, they're neighborhood churches. They are neighborhood, block clubs. They are, really folks that are not one organization can come in and address the problems the way that they're layered. Financially, as a United Way, we still support what are called help centers, and there are three hubs based at community churches that distribute water each week, food and nutrition each week, information and test kits so people can test water, filters if they need filters. But it really it takes a full-on effort to try and sustain that. And quite frankly, without the church community and the faith community that we have in the city, there just would be no way that we could help in the way we're able to. And so I'm grateful for those partners, really at the churches. And I have to tell you, before the water crisis, as a United Way, we funded a lot of different programs, but mostly through agencies. And since the water crisis happened, we've developed a lot deeper relationship with the faith community. I guess I didn't imagine that our United Way was going to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars with church partners through distribution of stuff and so forth, and information and food and basic needs. But it turns out that was the solution that was going to work for us. And like I said, we're grateful for those partnerships.
I think that's interesting, though, because I know, one of the things with everything that's going on, you mentioned it just now, as far as 5 years in which this has been happening, and it seems like it's been a slow and steady increase to get to some sort of comfort level. But at the same time, with the people of Flint, I think you even mentioned it once before as well in some communication, as far as just the erosion of trust. You go from basically having, something that we all take for granted as water, and then you find out later on that there's been issues in regards to the water, as far as, the phosphates that are supposed to be used in it. And now people are seeing, this has been ongoing. And then I think that's probably helped with your partnership with the faith-based community as well, because in the past we've seen in which, if there's any issues in a community, if you go to the church, they know how to set everything straight. And that's where the strongest focus comes to as well.
I mean, again, I absolutely agree with you. I think that, when we think about I get asked this question: would the Flint water crisis have happened in a community that was not of color, white majority community? I get asked that question, and the truth is, there are a lot of issues of systemic disparity and that have gone on for a long time. And I don't think the crisis would have happened in a majority white community. When the crisis was kind of going in the first probably year and a half after it was kind of finally acknowledged, the Michigan Civil Rights Commission came into our community and really spent a lot of time listening to residents and trying to come up with, how did this happen and what are some of the solutions and recommendations. And it was clear that the Civil Rights Commission identified kind of the historic disparity that African Americans in Flint had experienced. And, that goes back to housing discrimination. It goes back to, really decades of challenges and struggles that are, I think, not unlike other urban communities. Again, when we talk about, people ask, well, why did the water crisis happen? Well, it's not just that someone didn't treat the water with phosphates, right? It really goes back to how we we treat each other in community and equity. We think about issues like for 20 or 30 years, we weren't investing the right amount of money in the infrastructure of the city to support those residents that were here, right? So the infrastructure itself that was supporting the city, which is, again, majority African American, wasn't maintained necessarily in a way that would lead it to be of the kind of quality we would expect, right? Or that everybody deserves. And so we had a challenged infrastructure, and then we had an emergency management situation where the city was in crisis and the state appointed an emergency manager. And the fascinating kind of, if people like to take a deep dive into voter rights and the different kinds of things, but the voters across the state of Michigan repealed the emergency manager law by ballot initiative. And if you understand what that takes, that's thousands of people across the state getting a petition, getting it signed, getting it on the ballot, and the voters of Michigan overwhelmingly repealed that law because they didn't feel like it was fair. And the same day it was basically repealed, that repeal was to take effect, the legislature passed another emergency manager law that had provisions that made it so the voters couldn't repeal it, right? So we have this fascinating kind of dynamic of voter rights. And when I think about the African American leaders in our community that are older, that sort of walked across the bridges, and they're older than me, right? I didn't have that experience growing up, but for folks that really lived, some gave up their lives for the right to vote. You just took that population and said you're repealing this law, doesn't matter. So you've got this issue that's maybe not related directly to putting phosphates in the water, but really contributes to the mistrust that happens throughout this kind of the arc of this thing. I honestly, what a challenging situation to think about. I know people want to hear when I get asked. They want it to be a simple answer. They want to, well, someone didn't flip a switch right, or this quite didn't get done just right, and this is how you fix it. These are long-term problems that we have in our communities, and I'm sure your guests have talked about them, and you all have experienced in your community these kind of issues. I think we have to be open and honest about them and realize that the results of kind of the fruits of that kind of behavior. How do we move forward in a much more equitable way? And I think the last year has been sort of just this whole thing across the United States when we talk about Black Lives Matter and we talk about kind of equity and just a whole lot of energy around being able to hopefully have those courageous dialogues about that. I realize I'm kind of drifted.
No. This is what we do. You're fine.
So I'll shut up for a minute. I'll let you guys get back to some questions.
Well, we are the People's Podcast, so we do not, we try to keep things with questions, so we don't want any silence and lag time. However, this is where we have viewers, because our viewers want to feel like they're sitting down and they have Mr. Gaskin in their living room, and we're going over tea or coffee and we're saying, hey, what are your thoughts? And sometimes you have to be very scripted in your position and being in the public eye. And, obviously we know you're not going to do or say anything that's contrary to that, but at the same time, you can be a little more relaxed with us as well. To, hey, this is what it is. And speaking of the whole disaster of the Flint water crisis, um, something so major, it's not such a simple movie script of, oh, someone forgot to let this switch up for a month and then it contaminated the water, or you had this weird animal that got into the reservoir and then they contaminated the water. This was years and years and years of strategic neglect. And so you have to speak to that, you have to call it out, and you have to say what you're saying now. Hey, this is something that we have to move forward from. And I think your organization and the community that you've been working with is the start, because you're on the ground, you're in the people's face, you're in the citizens' faces, you're giving them the assistance, you're talking to them, and you're being honest when you're speaking to them. It feels good to slam someone, it feels good to point the finger, but we as citizens, people, we have a duty to make sure that we are aware and knowledgeable of what we're voting for and why. We also, when you're running in running for these different political offices, you have a duty to uphold the citizens of that community that you are, wanting to be a leader in. And so, everything that you have brought up is just confirming that we have a job to do, and so do our politicians in those areas. So, um, with COVID in your organization. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Carrie.
I was gonna say we got people asking questions right now.
Oh, we do.
Yeah.
What are they saying?
One of them just popped up. Mr. Jeremiah Holt, thank you for joining us on that Roundtable podcast show. He had posed a question. The question is how to bypass the personal interest in favor of the greater good of the community as a whole. I think he wanted Mr. Gaskin's opinion on that, since he's been on the ground. What are your thoughts about that?
Sure. Well, I think I think you're speaking to really right power dynamics, right? Mm-hmm. About the interests of who's making the decisions. I think that during the course of the crisis, I mean, again, you kind of had this period where the water was not good, and the state of Michigan and the feds, different people were saying, "Oh no, it's okay, it's not really as bad." And so you had this longer period of time where people weren't listening to other people that were drinking the water, right? And so then we get to a moment where, okay, the water is bad. We kind of acknowledge that now we have to kind of fix it. All along the way, as a united way, what we tried to do was advise the state of Michigan that you need to engage the residents, and you need to empower the residents to be part of the the advisory groups or the solution kind of creation to help the community. And I think the challenge is that government doesn't do that very well. I mean, we have a lot of experiences where maybe there's a problem in a community, you bring the people in and you have a little, meeting, and people get mad and they talk to each other. Yep. But there really isn't a power sharing methodology in the solution side, right? Mm-hmm. And that's where kind of the how you say that, that's where you can, the interest of the people in the community and supersede the interest of any one individual's desire for something. So I think the magic is in sharing the decision-making power in a real way. And again, I would say that government in general doesn't do that real well, because the folks that are the experts want to be the experts, right? Mm-hmm. And so somehow that sharing of that power and the decision making around the solutions has to happen. I can tell you we constantly share that message with our partners at the state of Michigan, through trying to work together for many of the different solutions too. But it was just difficult because culturally that just isn't a part of how they operate historically, right? So there's a lot of great work that can be done to make that better, moving forward. Hopefully that helps. I mean, I know that's just a tough question too, right? There is always people that are trying to feather their own nest, one way or another, when you're dealing with things, and the power dynamics are just. I think that's the spot where we got to do things better.
Good response, Jeremiah. Hopefully that answered that question for you. Angie Bell just chimed in as well. Things were never built for us. We received what was left over or cheapest. Do you feel as though that's the dynamic, Mr. Gaskin? Because I think you mentioned several times in regards to how, it's not just the phosphates, but also as far as the structure in, the school system. I think we just briefly talked right before we came on the air. Do you see that as, basically the disparity? Is that the common norm there?
Well, here's what I mean. I think historically we can pick all kinds of examples, right? When across the United States, when decisions were made to put freeways right through the middle of towns, right, which almost every city got one, they disproportionately pushed minority and African American families to the side to build highways. I mean, that's just
this is true.
the way it happened. We right now in Flint have a housing development that's being demolished and shut down, where in the 1960s it was built essentially in a swamp, and they moved families there, and it's been one of the most violent and dysfunctional kind of housing developments for the last 30 or 40 years, and thankfully, in the last 7 years or so, and then we finally got new housing up. The United Way is providing dollars to a process of moving all those families out of that property that was really established in a really I don't know any other way to say it. I mean, just building the property like that and putting people there is evil. I mean, it's just not good, or it's not just. So I think we're in a different place societally now than maybe we were when some of those decisions were made. But then something like the Flint water crisis pops up, and you're like, where I thought things were getting better. So I just think we have to be vigilant against that. And I think people are really sharing their voices right now, maybe in some ways that we haven't in the last decade, right? So hopefully that will help. And we're becoming a more diverse United States, right? There's no denying that the way our populations are changing, and the diversity in our population overall is going to drive us to a more multicultural society. And I think that's a healthy thing, because I think there's going to be more opportunity for representation for underrepresented groups. And again, I think it comes back down to that issue of power. When you're making a decision, are the people in the room making the decision? Are they representative of the folks that are going to be impacted?
Very good.
Well,
Very good. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So, Mr. Gaskin, if you had a huge wish bucket, what would you want to see? What abilities and what changes would you want to see, say, within the next 4 months? What would you like to see happen? I know realistically, but what would you like to see happen?
So I don't think what I'd like to see happen could happen in 4 months. But let me give you some ideas about what I think would be helpful in our community to be whole again. And I know that folks in community and some of our philanthropic partners would love to be able to see this, but we need a complete rebuilding of our schools. Our largest urban school district, the Flint Community Schools, which there are some smaller districts just outside the city that I would say have similar dynamics. But quite frankly, the facilities that we have our kids in need to be rebuilt from top to bottom. I like to tell people, if we can drop a city in the middle of a desert and we can build a city, to fight a war halfway around the world, we can rebuild every school in our urban communities at a very high quality, and it'll probably be less expensive than building a city in the desert. So I think that we really need the infrastructure to have some equity built into it in some ways that haven't been done. And I guess that has to happen. It has to start at the federal level, right? Our legislators got to pass an infrastructure bill, and then they've got to, how do you say this? And I know this will rub some people the wrong way, but disproportionately look at communities of color that for a long time have not received the disproportionate investment and make those investments. There's just no other way around it. So I kind of start with those kind of things, like rebuilding the schools, making sure the infrastructure that supports our quality of life is improved significantly. And there's so many places that need help. It's hard. How do I say this? I've been getting some equity education myself from a program that it's described as groundwater. I don't know if you've heard that before. I'm just now kind of learning into some of that space. And, it talks about the systematic racism being in the groundwater, kind of all across these systems. So if you pick one system to improve, you can make it a little bit better, but ultimately it's just going to, deteriorate over time. You kind of have to build the thing from the base up. And quite frankly, that's going to start with a lot of just basic education for people and acceptance of our history. So I always go back, and when you say, what would I do in the next 4 months? Goodness, honest to God, yeah, I can give you a list. I wish that there were folks that needed their a more robust investment in their personal properties. Whether that's plumbing or roofs or the things that the housing in Flint for many families, the house itself is worth less than putting a roof on. They can't insure the house because it's not worth very much. How can we bring some stability in that housing space? But not just for a few families, but we have to lift thousands of families, right? This is not about a pilot program that helps 50 families in one neighborhood in Flint. That's great, but this has to be about thinking bigger than that, about trying to lift the whole environment, which is again, that's got to happen in Washington D.C. And I think we on the ground have to try to demand that those kind of things happen.
Interesting. Mr. Gaskin, let me touch on, or let's go in a different direction with this, because we all know that Flint hasn't had acceptable drinking water for some time. With that being said, before it was even brought up to the attention of the public, most of the Flint, Michigan residents had been drinking the water. So have you seen any type of health issues that resulted in them doing so?
Well, so the water quality challenges that Flint had, right, were not just about lead, quite frankly, right? Aging infrastructure. We learned a lot about the inside of pipes and the way that they work and the way that the environment inside the pipe, matures over time. It has to be stable, so even when we think about demolishing homes in Flint, which, we have I guess what's been described as the most abandoned zip code in the United States, in the 05 zip code, lots of abandoned homes. When you do demolition and you start shaking the ground around and you start moving everything, there's also things that happen with that can create other health problems. I will tell you that the residents had complained about hair loss, about rashes, about other kinds of health things, maybe not directly connected to lead. And when the CDC came into our community and did the largest rash study in the history of the CDC, I kind of we actually basically advertised that anybody with a rash to call 211, our helpline, and get referred and get them to see a physician who could then kind of explore the cause of the rash. And there were all kinds of health reasons why people were having rashes. It was not just the water. There were lots of other environmental issues affecting people's skin. Now, the CDC concluded at the end of that study that they thought that the water quality did impact all those other issues, but they couldn't prove it because it's after the fact.
Right.
But I mean, goes back to that whole social determinants of health kind of issues. If we look at our own county of Genesee County, if you live in the city of Flint, your life expectancy, I want to say, is close to 10 years less than if you live in a small suburb outside of Flint. Flushing is the name of the little town. But if you look at urban area and you compare life expectancy, you have incredible disparity. So I think we have to spend a lot of time thinking about the social determinants of health and how we can bring equity in that space. And I do sit on some groups, our local health coalition, that's very focused on that. And that's made up of a very diverse group of health leaders in our community, and hospitals, CEOs to health plans to African American physicians to folks concerned about what the social determinants of health long term mean. I think what we sometimes fail to recognize is that it also is good business for people to be healthy. I mean,
right.
If people want to make the business argument that investing in these cities is a waste of time, or people don't deserve the help, or whatever that argument might be, the reality is if we have a healthy citizenry that's engaged, they're going to be more productive. Their whole lives are going to be. They're not just going to be happier people because they have a nicer house. They're going to be healthier people that cost less to maintain in the health system, quite frankly, and that are more productive as citizens that create a more vibrant culture. So it's kind of counterintuitive to not invest in these places, because when you don't, the costs are human life, right? At the end of the day, we lose. But when we invest in them over time, we get a tremendous amount of return on that investment. So I like to say you can make the business case for why we should be investing more, not just because we're maybe righting a wrong, or well, we say maybe not just because we would be righting some wrongs, but also it makes all the sense in the world for our country to thrive.
Wow.
So, you opened up my mind to thinking just in the more, and it's a bigger picture. You automatically know there's more pieces to the puzzle. But you just enlightened me so much to say, okay, there's stacked on this and this is stacked on this. It's almost like the domino effect. And going back, if they were to rebuild up one part, then that means you have to continue it. You have to build all the way around, all the way down, all the way around the communities, neighboring communities. And that right there is energy. It takes effort. It takes care. And sometimes it doesn't appear that that's something that they want to do. So, you've mentioned sitting in so many different groups and being a part of so many different missions, and you have so many other partners. How do you keep going? How do you maintain who James Gaskin is?
I tell you what, I first and foremost, I try to love the family that I have. I mean, beyond the work outside the walls of my humble home here, I really try to take care of the. I think I know it sounds cliche, but I think we learn a lot when we love one another, right? And the friendships that I have that help sustain me. My best friend is an African American gentleman, and we shared for many years Lions season tickets. We were both given up on paying all that money for those tickets. We're still Lions fans, but we get together every week for breakfast. He owns a small business here in the community that he's trying to grow. He's my best friend, and quite frankly, after my immediate family, those friendships that I have and those authentic relationships are really important. And I as a kid, I grew up in a community that was far from a community like Flint. I grew up in a very small northern Michigan, pretty much all white kind of community, and I didn't. How would I say this? I didn't know, what I didn't know, and I think we have to break bread together as people to be able to not be afraid of each other. And I think that again, this goes back to this kind of power dynamic that goes on. There's so much fear, and there's legitimate animosity. And but I certainly want to acknowledge there are people that have a set of beliefs that I can't understand how they got there, right? In terms of folks that are hardcore, racist, or I don't understand how somebody gets to that point. Quite frankly, and it's not my area of expertise, but there are a lot of good people that I think if people took the time to build friendships, that a lot of really positive work could be done. And I guess that's what keeps me going is going to my kids' sports games and hockey games and having breakfast with my best friend, and then really seeing these spaces in community where we have been able to make progress, right? It's just a little bit though, right? I mean, sometimes you get frustrated because I want this much, but sometimes we only get this much. I hope that helps.
Oh, yeah,
Absolutely. Yes, yes.
Oh, got a comment. Charlie Twos, thank you for joining us at Roundtable Podcast Show. She says facts. She said friendly is important, and you must have the uncomfortable conversations to heal our community. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
I absolutely agree. I will say the next step to that is, though, this is important. This is where things fall short. You can have the conversation, but then power and decision making has to be shared, right? Because you can get to that point where you're getting in the room and have that conversation, then you go back and you still make the same decision you were going to make before you got in the room. Like there has to be a sincerity and a sharing of some of the decision making. It just doesn't work without that piece. If you don't have that, ultimately you're going to find someone that's going to take that power, and it's not going to be equitably kind of distributed.
I'll say it. I'm curious, Mr. Gaskin, with this situation that has been going on over the last 5 years, has there been a lot of displacement or people moving out of the community?
So yeah, that's an interesting question, right? If people really don't understand Flint was home to the biggest company on the planet for decades, right? General Motors was here in our community for decades, and it was the largest company on the planet. So we had 200,000 people or more living in the city, and 100,000 people working in automotive. Now, General Motors is still in automotive the dominant industry here. We have about 10,000 people, but 100,000 people left the city. As those jobs left the community and moved elsewhere. There's been a real struggle to get people to want to live in the city and stay in the city, especially with the water quality and quite frankly, the cost of water. If I can take my little family and I can move one street over and be in the neighborhood municipality, and I can pay half as much for my water, and I trust it, and I maybe get a school system that I think maybe be better for my child. A lot of families are just going to do it, right? Because they're going to do their best to take care of their family. And I think we're challenged by that dynamic in the city of Flint, right? We need that disproportionate investment in the city to attract people to want to stay in the city. And that goes for all, all kinds of different things. I know it's, how do I say this? I know it's uncomfortable conversation right now across the country when we talk about like policing, right? And reinvestment around policing. But, Flint's been a city where, quite frankly, we haven't had a lot of big controversy with the police, right? The police have been pretty sensitive to the racial challenges that we've had because we've been in Flint for a while. But we don't have a robust public safety because the tax base doesn't necessarily support it, right? So when you look at, and how do I say this? I'm really trying to be sensitive, but in a sense, Flint is under invested in the public safety sphere than over invested and needs to regenerate. We need more of kind of everything to be a more whole community. And I think the city needs a lot of investment. Now, I do want to say, we have had our last two mayors have been strong African American leaders, right? Right now, Mayor Sheldon Neely has a long family history here in our community, and probably everybody knows Mayor Karen Weaver for the role that she played in the Flint water crisis in terms of lifting the disaster, right? She declared the disaster, quite frankly, when others wouldn't. And she really deserves a lot of credit for having the courage around that. But we have in the city African American leadership, and as long as that leadership is empowered to do the work that they need to do, and quite frankly, resourced to do the work by the state and in the broader country, I think we can thrive again. I think the challenge is always about getting that disproportionate investment in these communities that need it, right? It's not just Flint. In Michigan, there's probably 5 or 6 cities that you can lift up, both large and small, that need additional investment. Saginaw, Benton Harbor, Pontiac, some areas around Detroit. There's been some there are, and I'm sure around the country, there are these pockets where we need this disproportionate investment. And quite frankly, no politician who's elected can fix the problem without the disproportionate resources and investment. You can't send somebody to fix this without the resources to fix it. And the other, I like to share with people. You hear a lot of people that are maybe negative will say, well, why, we just can't keep throwing money into these cities. We can't just keep, if we put money in the cities, that, people aren't going to appreciate it, and we're just giving more money for, the reality is the cities like Flint built the whole state of Michigan, right? When Flint was pumping out, thousands and thousands and thousands of automobiles with 100,000 employees, those 100,000 General Motors workers were disproportionately making sure everybody across Michigan in rural and urban communities had the infrastructure lift, right? And so I like to say that, it's time to help those cities that for really the better part of 100 years drove the other things to thrive, right? So there really is sometimes one area is going to do better and sometimes the other, but we need to find a way to kind of lift and again disproportionately invest in some of these cities, and we just can't do it part way, right? Because again, part way means it looks nice for a minute, then it slowly deteriorates again. I think we've got to get the kind of lift that really changes things, and I hope that's on the way. I mean, at least we're having the conversations, right? I will tell you, I've grown up so much during the water crisis itself. I mean, I would say I'm a pretty enlightened guy, working in the city, both in Flint and Lansing for years and years. But I will tell you the water crisis itself, just put me in a position with people at a deeper level. And for me, I'm grateful from the sense that I've been able to learn a lot. And I kind of try to approach it this way, that I'm constantly learning, right? I'm constantly learning about the history of our people and the history of how we've communicated. And if you take a deep breath and be patient and try and do better every day, and acknowledge that, we don't have all the answers. We're only going to find the answers if we share that power and do it together.
Wow. That's true. Mr. Gaskin, I am originally from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So talking about an industry, once that industry leaves, it depletes the town, the cities around it. Same thing happened with the steel mills, the exact same thing. And it's amazing how, while the city of Pittsburgh has not had nearly as much devastation as Flint, there is a lot of similarities and disparity in the urban communities. It mirrors And then I'm a little nervous that it may get to that, say, in another 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, I think, what's unfortunate that I see is that things that should seem pretty simple become politicized, right? It becomes either a conservative or a liberal agenda item, and by gosh, if I'm not going to get the whole thing, I can't even get part of the thing, right? Or I'm going to use this so I can get this. Like we got to have some level of common sense, and quite frankly, if we focus on facts, right, and truth in general, most decisions are really not all that hard. But when we're kind of on these polar opposites sometimes, and we're using one agenda item to strategically get another one, we lose sight of the thing that we need to get in the first place. And we need a whole lot more of sort of common sense compromise. And the crazy thing in my mind is the facts, 90% of the time they lead to the same place. But somehow we find ourselves, have this huge gulf between us because we're more worried about our own agenda and other things than the problem at hand. I think we have to find a way to value human capital a whole lot more than we do, right? I can put a price on a bridge, but sometimes we don't take enough time to understand the value, of people and of justice and of these other issues. Probably a lot of times, some people are just scared of it, right? Dealing with it. Some people are legitimately, they're just out there. They're just not going to move on it. But I think most people, given a common set of facts and willing to work through things, can find some solutions.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Quick question.
So-
Go ahead, Adrian. Go ahead. My fault.
No, go ahead. I was just going to reset it just for the viewers that were joining us or just now joining us. Tonight we are being joined by Jamie Gaskin, Chief Executive Officer of the United Way of Genesee. His organization is on the front lines with the helping out with Flint's water crisis. Okay, CD.
Now, I just had I was thinking about something because I know right before we got on, one of the things that you were sharing with us, Mr. Gaskin, as far as your work, with the children in the beginning, prior to switching over to United Way. And it's interesting because in that area, I think it mentioned, it's about 30% of the children live in high poverty, 60% of them are in shelters. Has that number increased dramatically because of this water crisis? And what is the legacy now for them because of this?
Flint's been a community that's really struggled mightily before the water crisis, right? Mm-hmm. And I would be completely in agreement that the water crisis accelerated a lot of the problems that we already had, in ways that made them worse. I think, before the water crisis, we had lots of kids in Flint that were exposed to lead paint in their homes that were going to have learning disabilities as a result, right? And we sort of added to that toxic stress with another factor. So yeah, I think the water crisis made a very difficult situation worse in a lot of aspects of how people live and their experience. I do think what the water crisis, though, did also is it made everybody across the country and quite frankly across the world stop and scratch their head for a minute and say, wow, what the heck happened here? Like, I think there's these moments of inflection, and I think the Flint water crisis really created one of those. And I would like to hope, that in the long term it can propel us to change some of our behavior around how we handle things. When the Flint water crisis happened, school districts across the country, all of a sudden a light bulb went on and they started testing their water. There's a federal loophole that says that schools that are on a municipal water system don't have to test their water. So, we know that old school buildings now, what I've learned through the water crisis is old school buildings are designed in a way that doesn't really help the water quality, right, over time. And so, thousands of schools across the country, people woke up and tested the water, demanded that the water be tested, and lo and behold, there were crises in the schools, out east, and hopefully they're being addressed. I hope we can learn something from it. I would say I get asked the question all the time. Well, how can I help Flint? And the first thing I say is, I just say, first help yourself. If you have kids going to school in a school district, as a parent, you should know that the water's safe, and you should ask that question to your school board. On an annual basis, at least, are you testing the water to make sure my kids are safe? Especially if your kids are going to school in old buildings, right? If they're going in a new building, you have probably less risk. But if your kids are going, and these are in urban and rural communities, it's not just a city problem. And so I'm kind of of the mindset that when I'm asked how do I help, or how do I help Flint, I say, well, first make sure your own community, you're holding it to the standards that you need to, so more kids or more families aren't impacted by the low water quality. Second, man, get folks in Washington to pass a massive infrastructure bill to fix what's under the ground across the country, right? Think about those big picture things. In Flint, we're going to continue to struggle. I mean, there's no easy answer to Flint. We're going to continue to, what do you call that? Where you kind of grind, you just kind of keep after it. Yeah, we're going to be like that Michigan State basketball team. We're going to just keep grinding. We're going to keep grinding. We're going to keep grinding. And then, we think things get better. We see certain aspects of our lives get better. And quite frankly, like I said, our community has been led. The last two mayors have been what I believe are good, strong African American leaders. And I think we have to give them the tools, though, to be successful. This is not. We can't give them a piece of flint and steel or two sticks to rub together. This is the digital age. We need to give them the tools and the resources needed to be able to thrive. And I think there's good things in the future. And I try to be optimistic as heck, because I do know our children and young people are different than us, or than me. I'm 50. I'm kind of in the middle. I'm not one of those old guys, and I'm not one of those young guys either, right? I'm sort of grew up in the 80s. But I do have this faith and hope that as we become more diverse as a nation, that representation and the power sharing, one way or another, will happen. There's always going to be people that are going to fight it. There's just always going to be people that are going to be fighting because they don't want to give up the influence. But I'm certainly one that feels like when we're sharing power together, we're gonna get a lot farther together. Because, man, I still think we all want the same stuff. We want to love our kids. We want them to get great education. We want to have them have a chance to have a job where they're fulfilled, where they can take care of their family. We want to have our faith communities where we find joy and culture. Man, I don't think we get people in a room and disagree on all those things. And those are the big important things.
Right.
Yes, indeed. Right. That's true.
So we are 5 minutes out, family. So if you have any questions for Mr. Gaskin, please, put them in. And we always know when we have a great guest and our family is feeding, because they're listening. They're not, commenting a lot. They don't have a lot of questions, because you're giving them the knowledge and you're answering the questions just by speaking to us. So if anybody has anything that they want to ask, please get this in now. Mr. Gaskin, if there is any type of organizations, any kind of people want to know what they can do. If there's anything that you can provide for information for our viewers and our listeners, our family to help support your cause, please feel free to share that with them now.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I again, I first tell you, take care of your own communities where you have issues. Really do that sincerely. I mean, we do still at the United Way have a water fund that we take no administrative costs out of. We've taken none from the very beginning of this. It's at our website, UnitedWayTennessee.org. You go to donate, you can hit the water button. You can give $5 or $10. We certainly appreciate that support. But I guess you have to think about when we talk about philanthropy and people who want to help. What we really want to do is try to understand how they want to help and what will honor their gift in the right way. So for some people, even though I kind of chuckle, we had people driving cases of water to Flint, and honest to God, it cost them more money for the gas and the fuel and the thing. They'd fill up a little car with water. They'd drive here with 20 cases of water, and it would, quite frankly, they probably could have spent $20 and we probably could have bought more water. But they needed to come and they needed to be with community and they needed to kind of connect with a church or some kind of a grassroots effort. So, I just encourage people to explore those kind of ways to help. It's ultimately not about coming to the United Way and being a United Way volunteer, right? It's about engaging with the community in a way you are passionate about and finding someone to help. So there are some people out there who are probably what I would describe as, basic needs people that want to see people get just water. And then there are people that are advocates that are, want to be out there kind of pushing the politicians and pushing people on the policy side of things. We need people to do all of the above, right? And some of us have different gifts, right? And being the politician is not my gift. I don't ever want to. I'm never running for office.
Well, there goes my last question.
That's not what makes me happy. That's just not my cup of tea. I'm willing to talk to all those politicians and tell them what I think is true and how they might be able to help. But I certainly don't want to spend my life trying to get elected to a job. That's for somebody else. But I appreciate the fact that you're kind of reaching out, just saying, "Hey, what's going on in Flint?" From I don't know where all your audience is from, but I know you guys are down south a little bit, enjoying a better weather than I have, and I'm just thankful that you're willing to share and think about things openly, and I hope that people listening, this gives them some kind of hope that this is not all is lost. There's been a lot of great stuff that's happened in the last year when I look across the country and I think about what's possible. So I'm an optimist.
And we need more of those now, more than ever.
Yes. Yes.
We do. It's certainly been refreshing even to have this dialogue and you coming on to share your insight with us this evening. And we certainly greatly appreciate you doing so.
Well, like I said, I'm just happy to be here and happy to do my best to tell the Flint story. There's a lot of other voices. I think that's important too. It's not my 50-year-old white guy voice, right? I mean, I'm just telling the truth. It is the voices of thousands of folks that live through this in Flint. And everybody has their own different experience, and that experience is authentic. I mean, it's authentic to them, and we got to find a way to help as many folks, kind of deal with that as we can, and share that.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Well, family, we've come across that time that we really do not like, and it is the time which we have to close the doors and wrap everything up. But if you get a chance, please share this show to everyone that you know. I think it's definitely something that people need to see. We've actually posted as well in this show the website addresses, not only to the United Way in those respective counties, but also the donate link as well. So if you feel blessed in order to share with them at this time as they grow and get out of this mess, definitely do so. From the At the Roundtable podcast family, we thank you, Mr. Gaskin, for joining us. And the man with the plan, A Money, thank you for joining and bringing this guest. It's been long overdue. This has been something in which you've been passionate about, and you had always said you was going to do and shine that spotlight once again on this. So thank you, A Money, for that. We appreciate you.
Yes.
And for Melissa keeping us on point, we thank her as well. That's why she's the pit bull.
It wasn't too hard. It wasn't too hard. You guys you're doing great. Not too hard, Mr. Gaskin. I don't have to do anything. But I am. I'm grateful for you coming. This has been such an inspiration and an enlightening thing to me. I feel like I went to a restaurant and had my favorite dish and ate too much. I'm just sitting here, just.
I don't think anybody's ever said that to me quite that well. I'm not going to comment on that any further.
All right, and on that note. But yeah, thank y'all once again for joining us on that Roundtable Podcast Show. Join us next week because we'll have another fantastic guest. Again, share. Follow us on YouTube. Follow us on Facebook. Follow us on Spotify and Google Podcasts and many of the other podcast platforms. That's it. It's the People's Podcast, and we're out.